Jake was having a typical Earth day, scrubbing the same ungrateful backs of rich, overly demanding clients at his rundown spa in some forgotten corner of New York City. That was, until a literal alien emissary burst through the front door, dragging in a gust of cold air, and a smell Jake could only describe as wet dog mixed with burnt popcorn. Jake Miller, Earth's finest dermal artisan, the emissary declared, holding up what looked like a glowing, pulsating clipboard. The creature's tentacles waved impatiently as Jake stared, slack-jawed. "First of all, I don't know who lied to you about me being finest at anything," Jake said, nervously rubbing his damp hands on his apron. "Second, can I help you? You have been summoned to perform the sacred royal exfoliation for Her Eminence, Queen Zilthra of the Zilorian Empire. Refusal is not an option." Jake blinked. "But what now? Did my boss put you up to this? I swear, if this is about me asking for Christmas Eve off." Before he could finish, the alien snapped its fingers, or something resembling fingers, and in an instant, Jake found himself standing in a glittering palace that reeked of lavender and ozone. The walls shimmered with something like liquid light, and alien creatures of every shape and size bustled about, barely paying him any attention. "All right," Jake muttered to himself. "This is either the best day of my life or the part where I get probed. Please be the first one." A booming voice echoed through the grand hall. "Human!" Jake turned to see a towering figure descending a staircase that seemed to ripple beneath her feet. Queen Zilthra was a spectacle, 7 feet tall, her skin a mosaic of iridescent scales that shifted colors with every step she took. She moved with the kind of grace that only someone fully aware of their power could manage. "You are the chosen one," she declared, her voice a mix of regal authority and sultry undertones. "You shall perform the most sacred of rituals, scrubbing my royal back." Jake froze. His brain struggled to process her words. "I'm sorry, what?" "My back," Zilthra said, gesturing dramatically. "It must be cleansed before the Grand Galactic Summit. You have been deemed worthy of this honor." "Worthy? Lady, I can barely get through the day without dropping a loofah," Jake stammered. "And did you just say summit? What kind of political meeting requires exfoliation?" Zilthra's eyes gleamed. "In my culture, the appearance of one's back signifies strength and credibility. To arrive at the summit with an improperly scrubbed back would bring dishonor upon my empire." Jake blinked again. He was getting good at it. "So, no pressure, huh?" The queen didn't laugh. Instead, she clapped her hands, and a pair of attendants appeared, carrying an assortment of tools that looked more suited for torture than hygiene. One was a glowing brush that hummed ominously, another was a jar of gelatinous goo that shimmered like gasoline on water. What exactly am I supposed to do with that?" Jake asked, pointing at the goo. Zilthra tilted her head, her scales shifting to a deep gold. "That is Zorvian exfoliation gel. It will dissolve the impurities embedded in my royal dermis. You do know how to use it, don't you?" Jake let out a nervous laugh. "Oh yeah, totally. I use glowing alien slime all the time." The attendants handed him the tools and gestured toward an elaborately carved bench in the center of the room. Jake's stomach churned as Zilthra disrobed, revealing her back, a swirling canvas of colors and textures that seemed almost alive. "Well, this is happening," Jake muttered under his breath. He glanced at the glowing brush, the goo, and his trembling hands. "I really should have called in sick today." Zilthra lay face down on the bench, her voice commanding yet oddly vulnerable. "Begin." Jake gulped, dipping the brush into the gel and applying it to her back. The moment the gel touched her skin, it began to shimmer, and faint vibrations pulsed through his hands. "That tickles," Zilthra said, her voice unexpectedly playful. "Don't be shy, human. You must go deeper." Jake's face burned red as he stammered. This is, yeah, sure, deeper. Totally normal day for me." As he scrubbed, Zilthra let out a contented sigh. "You have strong hands. Perhaps Earthlings are more skilled than I was led to believe." Jake bit back a sarcastic comment. "Glad you're enjoying yourself. I, on the other hand, am just praying I don't accidentally turn you into glitter or something." Her scales began to shift into vibrant patterns of blue and green, mesmerizing Jake. "Wow," he said without thinking. "Your skin's, doing a thing." Zilthra chuckled, a sound that was equal parts regal and mischievous. "Ah, yes. My species communicates through the colors of our scales. It appears my body is responding well to your technique." Jake froze mid-scrub, his brain catching up a moment too late. "Wait, does that mean?" Zilthra didn't answer, but her scales deepened to a fiery orange, and Jake suddenly wished he'd stayed on Earth. Jake's hands moved tentatively, the glowing gel spreading across Queen Zilthra's back like liquid starlight. Each stroke seemed to trigger a reaction from her skin, the iridescent scales shifting in hue and texture. A shimmering gold gave way to swirling blues, which morphed into a deep, almost suggestive crimson. "That's quite colorful," Jake muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. "It indicates satisfaction," Zilthra replied, her tone both authoritative and oddly flirtatious. "You may continue. Deeper pressure is required for optimal results." Jake winced. The whole situation was teetering on the edge of absurdity, but he wasn't about to argue with a 7-foot alien queen who could probably vaporize him with a thought. He leaned in, scrubbing with slightly more force. "So, do you usually have your subjects do this?" Jake asked, hoping small talk might make the moment less bizarre. "Only the most trusted," Zilthra said, her voice carrying an air of regal pride. "In centuries past, this ritual was performed by my most devoted attendants. However, your species' reputation for precision and creativity made you a logical choice." Jake snorted before he could stop himself. "Creativity? Lady, I'm a guy who cleans other people's feet for a living. Not exactly Picasso with a loofah." Zilthra's scales shifted to a soft lavender, a color Jake could only interpret as amusement. "Modesty does not suit you, human. Your hands are far more skilled than you realize." He froze. There it was again, one of those comments that felt loaded, like she was testing him. Was she flirting? Or was he just reading too much into this? He decided to play it safe. "Thanks, I guess. Though I gotta say, this is the weirdest Yelp review I've ever worked for." The Queen chuckled, the sound reverberating through the room. "Humor. An unexpected trait. It is intriguing." Jake shook his head, focusing back on the task. As the gel began to foam slightly, the patterns on Zilthra's back grew more intricate, forming what looked like a map. He paused, tilting his head. Is this normal? Because your back is starting to look like a treasure hunt." Zilthra craned her neck to glance back, her expression unreadable. You've uncovered the markings. They are ancient symbols of my lineage, hidden beneath layers of dermal protection." Jake blinked. "So your back is, what? A family tree?" "More like a testament to my empire's power," Zilthra said, her tone suddenly more serious. "It is said that these symbols reveal truths only to those who are worthy. You should feel honored." Jake bit back a sarcastic remark. "Oh, yeah? Super honored. Nothing like discovering ancient alien secrets while exfoliating." The Queen's scales shimmered in response, and she let out a soft hum. "Your humor continues to amuse me, human. You are unlike anyone I have encountered." Jake sighed, unsure if that was a compliment, or just another alien backhanded observation. He resumed scrubbing, though his curiosity was now piqued. "So, what happens if someone unworthy does this? Does your back, self-destruct or something?" Zilthra's laughter was low and velvety. "Not quite. Though there are reactions." Before Jake could ask what she meant, the gel began to bubble, releasing a faint, sweet scent that filled the room. Zilthra's scales glowed brighter, and her shoulders tensed slightly. "That scent, it's supposed to do that, right?" Jake asked, his voice laced with caution. "It's harmless," Zilthra said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Merely a side effect of the gel interacting with my royal physiology." Jake narrowed his eyes but kept working. "If you say so. But if I end up high off alien fumes, I'm billing you for therapy. The Queen smirked. Duly noted. As he continued, Zilthra began to speak more openly, her voice softening. You know, human, few would dare to take on this responsibility. My people consider this a sacred act, one that demands both skill and courage. Jake glanced at her glowing back. Courage, huh? I mean, I've dealt with some scary feat in my day, but this? Definitely a first. Zilthra turned her head slightly, her gaze meeting his. And yet you persist. That is admirable. Jake felt his face flush. Whether it was the compliment, or the increasingly surreal situation, he couldn't tell. Well, I guess quitting halfway isn't really my style. For a moment, the room fell silent, save for the gentle sound of the brush against her scales. Then Zilthra spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Tell me, human, do you ever feel underestimated? The question caught Jake off guard. He paused mid-scrub, thinking. Yeah? Pretty much all the time. Why? Her scales shifted to a soft pink. It is a sentiment I understand well. As queen, I am expected to project strength, to lead without hesitation. Yet there are moments when I wonder if anyone truly sees me. Jake hesitated, unsure how to respond. Well, I mean, you're a 7-foot-tall glowing alien monarch. Kind of hard not to see you. Zilthra smiled faintly. Perhaps. But being seen and being understood are not the same. Jake nodded, resuming his work. Yeah, I get that. Guess we've got more in common than I thought. The Queen's scales deepened to a warm gold, and she let out a soft sigh. You are full of surprises, human. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. You don't know the half of it. Just as he finished applying the last bit of gel, the room was suddenly filled with a faint vibration. Zilthra stiffened, her scales glowing brighter than ever. Is that supposed to happen? Jake asked, backing up slightly. Zilthra glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. It would seem you've triggered something unexpected. Jake groaned. Great. Because this day wasn't weird enough already. The vibrations grew stronger, and Jake instinctively dropped the glowing brush. What did I trigger? Please don't say it's a self-destruct sequence. I'm way too young to get vaporized by alien bat goo. Zilthra sat up slowly, her glowing scales dimming as she inspected the faint markings now visible across her back. It's not self-destruction, human. You've revealed something important. Jake squinted, trying to make sense of the symbols. They looked like a mix between crop circles and hieroglyphs, with no discernible pattern. Important like key to the universe, or important like oops, I just hacked your alien internet? The Queen traced a clawed finger over one of the symbols, her expression unusually serious. These markings are ancient. They map out the location of a long-lost artifact, one that could ensure the survival of my empire. Jake groaned. Oh, great. So now I'm part of a treasure hunt? I'm just a guy who gives scrubs, not Indiana Jones. Zilthra turned to him, her expression softening. You've proven yourself capable, Jake. It seems fate has chosen you for this task. Jake held up his hands. Hold on. Just because I'm good with a brush doesn't mean I'm ready to save the galaxy. Don't you have, I don't know, an army for this kind of thing? She let out a low, amused laugh. The markings respond only to the touch of one deemed worthy. That, apparently, is you. Jake muttered under his breath. Worthy. Sure. Tell that to my landlord. The Queen ignored his grumbling and stood, her regal demeanor returning as she gestured for her attendants. Prepare the royal transport. We leave at once. Jake blinked. Wait, we? I'm coming too. Can I just point you in the right direction and head back to Earth? Zilthra smirked, her scales shimmering in amusement. I require your assistance, human. And besides, you wouldn't abandon a queen in need, would you? Jake opened his mouth to protest but realized it was pointless. He was already in too deep. Fine. But if I end up getting eaten by some space monster, I'm blaming you. As they made their way to the transport, Zilthra glanced at him. You know, Jake, you are quite different from the humans I've read about in your planetary reports. Oh, yeah? He said, stuffing his hands into his pockets. What do those reports say? They describe your species as unpredictable, impulsive, and difficult to control. Jake snorted. Sounds about right. But don't forget charming and devilishly handsome. Zilthra laughed, a sound that made her scales shimmer with a warm golden hue. Modesty is clearly not a human trait. Jake shrugged. Hey, if you can't laugh at yourself, what's the point? As they boarded the transport, the mood grew lighter, though the weight of their mission lingered in the air. Zilthra's attendants handed her a glowing tablet, which she studied intently. Jake leaned over, trying to make sense of the alien script. So, what's the deal with this artifact? He asked. Why is it so important? Zilthra glanced at him, her expression contemplative. It is said to hold the power to unite my people, to end centuries of conflict. If we failed to retrieve it, my empire could fall into chaos. Jake let out a low whistle. No pressure, huh? She smiled faintly. Do you always deflect with humor, human? Jake leaned back in his seat. Pretty much. It's my best defense mechanism. That and running really fast. Zilthra's laughter filled the cabin, and for a moment, the tension eased. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was way out of his depth. As the transport sped through the stars, Jake found himself stealing glances at Zilthra. Despite her regal demeanor and the absurdity of the situation, she seemed human, in a way. Vulnerable, even. Hey, he said softly. You doing okay? I mean, I know this whole queen thing probably comes with a ton of stress. Zilthra tilted her head, her scales shifting to a soft lavender. It is rare for someone to ask me such a question. Most see only my title, not the individual beneath it. Jake nodded. Yeah, I get that. People tend to see what they want to see. But for what it's worth, you seem like you're doing a pretty good job. Her gaze softened, and for a moment she looked almost shy. Thank you, Jake. Your words are unexpected but appreciated. The moment lingered, and Jake felt a strange mix of pride and embarrassment. He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Anyway, let's just hope this artifact isn't guarded by anything with more teeth than brains. Zilthra smirked, the golden hue returning to her scales. You continue to amuse me, human. Perhaps this journey will not be so unbearable after all. Jake rolled his eyes but couldn't hide a small smile. Glad I could brighten your day, Your Majesty. As the transport approached their destination, Jake felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. He still wasn't sure how he'd ended up in this situation, but one thing was clear: life was about to get even weirder. The transport landed with a soft thud, and Jake was the first to step out, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, silvery ground. The alien landscape was a blend of beauty and menace, glowing plants that seemed alive in more ways than one, towering cliffs that looked as though they'd been sculpted by gods, and a distant hum that made Jake's skin crawl. This is the place? Jake asked, glancing over his shoulder at Zilthra. The queen stepped forward, her eyes scanning the horizon. The markings on my back indicate the artifact is located within that cavern. She pointed to a jagged opening in the cliffside, framed by glowing vines that pulsed faintly in the dim light. Jake sighed. Of course, it's in the creepy cave. Because why would it ever be easy? As they approached the entrance, Zilthra's attendants remained behind, bowing respectfully. Jake frowned. Wait, they're not coming with us? Don't we need backup or, I don't know, alien bug spray? Zilthra smirked, her scales shimmering. They cannot enter. The cavern is protected by ancient wards that will only allow those deemed worthy to pass. Jake raised an eyebrow. And you're sure I'm worthy? Because my credit score back on Earth says otherwise. Zilthra chuckled softly. The wards have already accepted you, Jake. Now stop doubting yourself. Jake muttered under his breath but followed her into the cavern. The air grew cooler, and the faint hum he'd heard earlier grew louder, resonating in his chest. The walls glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance with every step they took. Okay, not to jinx it, Jake said, But this isn't as bad as I thought. No giant space spiders yet. As if on cue, a low growl echoed through the cavern. Jake froze. Oh, come on! From the shadows emerged a creature that looked like a cross between a tiger and a scorpion, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Zilthra stepped forward, her scales shifting to a deep crimson. Stay behind me, she commanded. Jake, however, had other ideas. No offense, Your Majesty, but I'm not exactly great at staying out of trouble. The creature lunged, its massive claws swiping at Zilthra. She dodged gracefully, her movements fluid and precise. Jake, on the other hand, fumbled with a glowing rock he picked up earlier, hoping it could be used as a weapon. Hey, ugly! Jake shouted, hurling the rock at the creature. It bounced harmlessly off its carapace, and Jake winced. Okay, bad plan. Zilthra let out a sharp whistle, and the creature froze, its glowing eyes narrowing. It backed away slowly, retreating into the shadows. Jake let out a shaky breath. What just happened? Did you Jedi mind trick it? Zilthra smirked. A queen must learn to command respect, even from the wildest of beasts. Jake shook his head. You're terrifying, you know that? She glanced at him, her scales shifting to a soft gold. And yet you do not flee. Jake shrugged. Yeah, well, I'm in too deep now. Besides, I've seen worse on late-night TV. They continued deeper into the cavern, the hum growing louder until it was almost deafening. At the center of the chamber, a pedestal rose from the ground, and atop it sat the artifact, a glowing, crystalline sphere that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. There it is, Zilthra said softly, her voice tinged with awe. Jake approached cautiously. Okay, so what's the catch? Does it explode if we touch it? Summon another tiger-scorpion thing? Zilthra didn't answer. She stepped forward, reaching out to the sphere. As her fingers brushed against it, the cavern was flooded with light. Jake shielded his eyes, blinking rapidly as the glow subsided. When he looked again, Zilthra was holding the sphere, her scales shimmering like a living rainbow. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. It is done, she said, her voice soft but firm. Jake frowned. That's it? No dramatic fight? No, you're not the chosen one plot twist? Zilthra laughed, the sound echoing through the cavern. Must you always expect chaos, human? Jake crossed his arms. Hey, with my luck, I've learned to prepare for the worst. As they made their way back to the entrance, Jake couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. He might not have understood half of what was happening, but he made it through without dying, and that was a win in his book. When they stepped out into the open air, Zilthra turned to him, her expression softening. Jake, I must thank you. Without your assistance, I might never have succeeded. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It was nothing. Just your average day of scrubbing royal backs and dodging alien monsters. Zilthra smiled, her scales shifting to a warm gold. You are more than you realize, human. Perhaps fate has greater plans for you. Jake snorted. Yeah, well, if fate's listening, I'd like a vacation and maybe a raise. She laughed again, a sound that made him smile despite himself. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jake felt appreciated. As the transport lifted off, Jake leaned back in his seat, glancing at Zilthra. So, what happens now? You take that thing back to your empire and save the day? She nodded. That is the plan. But perhaps... She trailed off, her gaze lingering on him. Perhaps what? Jake asked, his tone light but curious. Perhaps there is a place for you in my court, she said, her voice soft. You have proven yourself more than worthy. Jake smirked. Tempting offer, Your Majesty. But let's see how this summit of yours goes first. I've got a reputation to uphold, you know. Zilthra chuckled, her scales glowing softly. Very well, human. But do not be surprised if you find yourself summoned again. Jake leaned back, closing his eyes with a satisfied grin. Story of my life.